Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of UPSC Civil Service Examination. In the first article, we'll talk about the issues related to the railway safety and the way forward. In the second article, we'll talk about the meaning and the importance of constitutional morality. In the third article, we'll talk about the issues related to the elderly care and the way forward. In the fourth article, we'll study about the technique of direct seeding of rice. In the fifth article, we'll talk about the initiative of Digi Yatra. Finally, in the prelims snippet section, we'll have a look at some of the very important topics for the preliminary exam. Now, the very first issue deals with the rail safety. So yesterday, what we witnessed was that there was a tragic train collision which claimed the life of many people and many have been injured. Now, this points towards the sorry state of affairs or the plaguing condition with respect to the rail safety in India. Now, this is with respect to GS3, infrastructure and railways. Now, before we talk about the issue of rail safety, it becomes important for us to discuss about the importance of railways in India in general. So, see, the Indian Railways is often termed as the lifeline of the nation because it has contributed a lot towards the socio-economic development of the country. Now, if we analyze its importance at different fronts, the first is with respect to the transportation. See, the Indian Railways is the dominant mode of transportation when it comes to both the passenger as well as the freight, right? And it has more than 65,000 kilometers of rail tracks. It has more than 14,000 passenger trains. It has more than 8,000 stations around the country. So this is a huge number. Second is that the Indian Railways is the most cost-effective and efficient and comfortable mode of transportation when it comes to the long distance travel. And it helps, for different purposes, for work, for pilgrimage, for tourism, for different activities. Next is the bulk goods movement. See, Indian Railways is the most efficient sort of transporter when it comes to the carriage of different goods, for example, coal, steel, manufactured items from one place to the other, right? So it helps to maintain the supply chain, the essential supply chain for these commodities, right? Next, when we talk about the socio-economic development, see, Indian Railways, through its extensive network, has helped to foster a cultural exchange, and that has helped to create a feeling of national unity. So that is how it creates the feeling of national integration. Next is market access. See, please understand that different farmers or different businesses, they gain access to different markets by going to different places. Thus, it boosts overall economic activity, right? Next is the employment generation. We all know that Indian Railways is itself one of the largest sort of employers in the public sector. It itself employs more than 1.3 million people directly. And if you talk about the indirect sort of source of employment, it is way higher. So it provides a large number of people the employment, the livelihoods, right? Next is the strategic importance. See, when it comes to the defense, so Indian Railways helped a lot of times in actually sort of transporting different defense supplies, in transporting the military supplies, in transporting the troops to different corners of the country, right? So that is how it helps in the strategic part. Next is disaster relief. It is the Indian Railways which transports the essential supplies or the personnel with respect to the management of disasters in India, right? Whether it's the cyclone, whether it's sort of any floods. So it is the Indian Railways which transports these sort of personnel and essential supplies. Now, before I go further, I want to ask two questions. Can you just tell me, the first question is, can you just tell me who is known as the father of Indian Railways? And the second question is that, can you just tell me which was the first passenger train in India? So I just want to know just the answer. So please post in the comment section below and let me see who posted the answer first. Now, if we talk about the sort of magnitude of train disasters in India or train accidents in India, what we see is that compared to the last decades, definitely the number or the frequency of incidents have come down. But primarily, if we see if the reasons which are responsible for these accidents, there are two. First is the human error, and the second is the outdated technologies. So primarily these two factors are responsible for the current state of affairs, right? If you go by the data, so the CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General data, says that during the period 2017 till 21, what we saw that there were more than 2,000 train accidents, right? And according to a data published by the NCRB, National Crime Records Bureau, what it says is that from the period 2017 till 2021, there have been more than 1 lakh deaths related to sort of these train accidents, right? All right. So this is the data with respect to the train accidents. Now, if you go into the recent incidents which have happened, the first is the triple train collision which took place in the Balasore district of Odisha last year. Now, this claimed more than 300 lives. So, 3 trains actually collided and it resulted into a loss of 300 lives and obviously a lot of property also. Next is the sad incident which took place in the COVID period of 2020 when a freight train, it actually ran over 16 migrant workers. 16 migrant workers who were actually sleeping on the track, right? So that is a very sort of sad story. Next is, what are the primary causes with respect to the railway accidents in India? See, please understand that we have got rail infrastructure. For example, we have got the overhead lines, we have got the tracks, we have got the bridges, we have got the rolling stock. Now, if and when they become defective, what we see is that it is because of the poor maintenance, it is because of the aging, it is because of the vandalism, and it is also because of the sabotage, and that is by anti-social elements. So when these sort of infrastructure of the rail, that is rolling stock or the overhead wires or the bridges, they sort of become defective primarily due to these reasons, we have got the situation of train accidents. Now, what we see is that majority of these infrastructure of rail infrastructure, it was built in 19th and 20th century, and that has not been upgraded to the mark in order to actually to cater to the growing demand, right? That is one of the reasons. Then is that there is a lot of lack of funds, there is corruption, there is inefficiency in the functioning, in the operations and management of the railways. That what results into these railway accidents taking place. Next is that majority of these routes in Indian railways, they are operating over 100% capacity, more than what they should ideally cater to. Many number of trains are running, and that situation is actually not suitable for the well functioning of the Indian railways, and this results into congestion, and this congestion is actually a risk for more accidents, right? Next is the human errors. See, the staff which is responsible for the operation and management of different equipments or running the trains, that suffers from fatigue, negligence or corruption or disregard to the safety sort of standards, and that sometimes results into the accidents taking place. So what we see is that lack of coordination between the staff, that results in wrong signaling, it results into miscommunication, and that obviously affects the performance, but in some cases it can lead to sort of a situation where you have got railway accidents which take place. Next is that, see, the railway staff, majority of the railway staff, they lack adequate training, right? And they lack adequate communication skills, right? That is what then what happens is that once you have got a sort of interaction or communication between different signals or different, let's say the loco pilot or the guard, what happens is there is sometimes miscommunication, and that results into these accidents taking place. Next is the signaling failures. See, please understand that we have got the signaling systems. Now, these signaling systems, they sometimes fail because of technical glitches or sometimes power outages. And once the failure of signaling system takes place, it obviously lead to the railway accidents. Also, these signaling failures lead to trains running on the wrong track, and sometimes they even go on the wrong track and then they collide with other trains or with some stationary objects. Next is the unmanned level crossings. See, these are actually the crossroads, the places where the people who are crossing these tracks, they are unaware about the approaching trains, right? So this poses a risk to the life of the people a lot. And what you see is that in 2018-19, these unmanned level crossings were responsible for 16% of the total accidents, right? So these are some of the reasons which are responsible for the train accidents in India. Now, what has been done for this to reduce the accidents? First and the foremost is the Rashtriya Rail Sanraksha Kosh. Now, this is a safety fund for critical assets. It's a safety fund for critical assets. It was primarily established in the year 2017 with a corpus of more than 1 lakh crore. Right. Now, this primarily aims to do the track renewal, or it primarily does the sort of bridge building, right? So what it does is it caters to the infrastructure needs of the railways, right? So that is what we call as a critical safety fund, right? Next is with respect to the technological upgradation. See, the first is the bogie mounted air brake systems. So we have got this technology, the bogie mounted air brake systems, which helps into sort of applying the brakes in a quick manner, right, without letting the train to derail, right? Next is we have got the improved suspension design, and we have got the provision of automatic fire and smoke detection systems. Also, we have got the anti-collision devices. For example, we have got the Kavach. Now, Kavach is a sort of an anti-collision device or an anti-collision system, which is a purely an indigenous system, right? So, just remember this. Next is we have got the LHB design coaches. That is, it is Link, Hoffman, Busch. So this is basically LHB coaches. Now they're based on the German technologies, and what we see is that they're better than the indigenous integral coach factory design coaches. Now the reason is that these coaches are actually anti-telescopic. They are anti-telescopic. What it means is that whenever these coaches, you can just see in the image, whenever these coaches collide with other train, they don't smash completely, right? They either derail, but what they happen is that they don't sort of compress. That is the beauty of these anti-telescopic coaches. Next is we have got the GPS based fog pass device. So what happens is that whenever you have a train which is crossing a signal and it is the situation, it's a condition of a fog. So there's it actually the loco pilot is aware. He comes to know about it by a buzzer sound, right? So he comes to know about the approaching signal or approaching level crossing through a buzzer sound. So he can reduce the speed of the train and make sure that there are no sort of unfortunate incidents. Next is we have got the modern track structure. We have got the pre-stressed concrete sleepers. Then we have got the ultimate tensile strength sort of rails, which are very strong in nature. Then we have got the ultrasonic flaw detection system. See, you have got the tracks, right? So in order to detect if there are any cracks in between or not, we use the system of ultrasonic flaw detection, and it helps. It's a non-destructive techniques which uses the sound waves, right? So just remember that. Next is we have got the interlocking systems, which uses electrical or electronic devices to operate the points and signals from a central location. So what it does is that it eliminates the need of manual intervention. It is a totally electronic and electrical based system, right? Next is the elimination of the unmanned level crossings. As we have seen, there have been sort of many programs by the government. A lot of funds have been diverted to this so as to replace these unmanned level crossings with road underbridges, ROBs, or we can just see in this image, you have a train passing by and you have got a road underbridge, or you have got the road overbridge also, right? So these are some of the steps which have been taken by the government. Now what else can be done in order to make sure that these accidents don't take place? See, the first and the foremost is we need to invest more in the safety related works. How? We need to have a dedicated funding for the track renewal. We need to have a dedicated funding for the signals upgradation, right? For making sure that these sort of unmanned level crossings, they are sort of replaced by the road underbridges or overbridges. Next is there needs to be a regular and comprehensive training to the railway staff. See, please understand that these railway staff need to be made aware with respect to these safety standards. They need to be made aware with respect to the operation and maintenance of the railways, with respect to these technologies. For example, we have got the Kavach system, as I said, right? So they need to be given proper training. Next is, as I said, that we need to eliminate level crossings through road overbridges or road underbridges. Next, what we can do is that we can adopt advanced technologies. Obviously, see, what we see is that we have definitely gone with the system, that is the anti-collision devices, for example, Kavach, which is a indigenous system. But what we see is the incident which took place in West Bengal, that line did not have the Kavach system, right? So what we need to do is we need to implement this system on a whole country level basis, right? Next is that we need to create a statutory railway safety authority. Now this has been recommended by a lot of commissions and committees, right? So that this safety authority is first statutory authority, that is by law, and it is given the mandate to set these standards, to make sure that it is sort of conducting regular audits, and to make sure that different sort of trains or staff or the other the institutes or different research organizations or the production units, they are following the protocol with respect to the safety, right? That is what is needed. Then there is a need for regular safety audits. We have already seen this, that we need to ensure regular safety audits in order to actually hold the person accountable, or the division accountable, or the zone accountable. Finally, there is a need for enhanced coordination and communication. See, please understand, Indian Railways is a very big body, mammoth body, right? So what we see is that we need to have sort of regular interactions between different zones, between different divisions, between different production units, let's say the integral coach factory, between the research organizations of Indian Railways. So what we see is that there needs to be a collaborative effort. Different entities need to come together. So what we see in totality is that such incidents, the risks to such incidents need to be minimized. And what we see is that the Indian Railways has been focusing upon a lot of steps, that for example the funding or these technologies, but it is not a sort of a more collaborative approach, and there is a dearth of funding. So we need to incorporate all these steps so as to make sure that we can minimize these risks and we can make the Indian Railways more efficient and more comfortable and obviously more safe. So the next article is with respect to the constitutional morality. So what we see is that this article has been written in the context of the political situation in the country, right? And it signifies the importance of the constitutional principles and the constitutional morality in the politics and governance. Now, this is with respect to GS2 Indian Constitution features and GS4 constitutional values. Now, see, what do we mean by constitutional morality? See, literally, it means adherence to the constitutional norms within a democratic system. However, its true meaning goes beyond this literal explanation. It means a commitment towards some basic foundational values, for example, that of social justice, sovereignty, or equality, right? So it is much more than this sort of literal interpretation. Now, this word constitutional morality was initially coined by the British historian George Grote in his work, A History of Greece. Right. Over there, George Grote, he actually signified or said that the constitutional morality, it embodies the balance between the freedom and restraint. That is, that a person has to submit before the constitutional bodies, but at the same time, he also has the power to criticize the same constitutional body, right? So he has to submit before the constitutional body, but at the same time, he also has the power to criticize that constitutional body. Now, in India, this term, constitutional morality, it was first used by Dr. Ambedkar in his speech on the draft constitution on November 4th, 1948. So what he said was that being subject to the constitutional morality means being subject to the moral principles which are inherent in the constitution. That is, if you are being subject to the constitutional morality, it means that you are being subject to the moral principles which are behind or which forms the basis of the Constitution of India, right? So that is what he meant. Now, the Indian Constitution does not explicitly talk about or mention the constitutional morality. But what we see, as I said, that it forms the basis of many of the constitutional values, right? Now, that is, it is deeply embedded in different provisions of the Constitution of India. For example, let's say the preamble. So the preamble starts with the very words, "We the people of India." So what it signifies is that the authority, ultimately, it lies with the people of India. Then it has very good aspirations, for example, justice or fraternity or dignity of the individual or liberty. Now these point towards the constitutional morality framework. Next is the rule of law. That is, we follow a rule of law. That is a rule of laws which are equally applicable to everyone. That is a government of laws and not of men. That there are no arbitrary provisions, right? Next is democratic principles. What do we mean by this? What we mean is that we follow a kind of representative democracy where the people have the right to choose their representatives and to hold them accountable, right? Next is the fundamental rights. The Constitution of India gives every citizen of India some very important fundamental rights. We have got the right to equality. We have got the right to life and personal liberty. We have got the right to freedom of speech and expression. So these actually signify the constitutional morality part. Next is the directive principles of state policy. See, Dr. Ambedkar termed these directives as noble features, right? And it has also been asked in the prelims. He termed them as noble features, right? So do remember this. Now these directives, they actually guide the state to pursue those goals which are sort of Gandhian, which are socialist, which are liberal intellectual in philosophies, right? Next is fundamental duties. What it signifies is that along with the fundamental rights, we also have a duty towards the nation, and that is incorporated in terms of the fundamental duties. Next is the separation of powers. What it means is that there should be a proper separation of powers among the legislature, the judiciary and the executive, so as to prevent any body having sort of more powers than the others, right? Having a balance of power. Next is checks and balance. That is the mechanisms or the institutions which make sure that the rights of the individuals are protected. And also it makes sure that no arbitrary actions are taken, right? So it makes sure that there is no arbitrariness in the actions by the state. Now, what are the judgments with respect to the constitutional morality in India? The first and the foremost is the Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, 1973. Now, this we all know that it established the sort of doctrine of basic structure, which actually restricted the parliament to alter some of the basic foundational principles of the constitution, right? Now, it is said that it was through this verdict of the Supreme Court that the constitutional morality came into being, right? So it was the judiciary who first actually led this concept of constitutional morality through the Kesavananda Bharati verdict. Next is the case of the Manoj Narula versus Union of India, 2014. Now, in this case, the Supreme Court clearly highlighted that there is a need to bow down to the principles of the constitutional morality, so that there is a curb to the arbitrariness by the state. Then you have got the case of the Indian Young Lawyers Association versus State of Kerala, 2018, which is also known as the Sabarimala case. Now, it was in this case that the Supreme Court used the constitutional morality through the principles of equality, through the principles of liberty, right, through the principles of justice, and then it allowed women to sort of visit these temples. Next is we have got the Navtej Singh Johar case of 2018, in which the Supreme Court read down section 377, and it was on the basis of constitutional morality that the Supreme Court actually read down this section 377. Next is the Government of NCT of Delhi case of 2018. Now, it was in this case that the Supreme Court said that the constitutional morality can be termed as a second basic structure doctrine. It highlighted that there needs to be a sort of a structure where there is no sort of arbitrariness by the state. Next is the Aadhaar case. We all know that it was through this case that the Supreme Court highlighted the importance of the courts in making sure that there is no arbitrary action by the executive, right? And all these are based on the importance of constitutional morality. Now, what are the challenges to the constitutional morality? See, the first and the foremost is the political interference. We have got the political interference in the functioning of the constitutional bodies and the institutions, and this affects their autonomy and impartiality, their independence. For example, we have got the sort of appointment committee to the Election Commission of India, right? There were also allegations that the information technology rules, there have been allegations that these are arbitrary in nature, right? This gives the executive a sort of arbitrary powers. Next is the debate between judicial activism and judicial restraint. See, please understand, judicial activism is definitely necessary because it promotes the right of the individual. But what we need to make sure that it should not go to that extent that it encroaches upon the domain of the legislature or the executive, right? So that is what we need to keep in mind. Next is the enforcement and compliance. The sad story is that in India, we have got very robust implementation laws and frameworks, but their implementation on the ground is severely lacking, right? So what we need to have is a proper implementation roadmap, right? Next is that there have been instances where the government of the day has been alleged to use the police or investigation agencies, especially against the opposition or the critics. Now, this is, see, we all know that these constitutional bodies or statutory bodies or investigating bodies, whatever they are for the public purpose. Now, if any political party, be it the ruling party or any party, if that is using it for its own selfish gains, then it is against the sort of very basis of constitutional morality, right? Now, what should be the way forward? See, please understand. The first and the foremost is that there is a need to strengthen these institutions, especially the constitutional institutions, the constitutional bodies or sort of different autonomous bodies, so that we can make sure that these bodies are independent. They can discharge their functions effectively. They can discharge their functions in an impartial manner, right? Then we also need to ensure that there is proper transparency and there is enhanced accountability, right? Next, we need to promote sort of greater civic education. especially with respect to the constitutional rights and obligation, that is the duties, and that too for especially the youths of the country. Next is we need to enhance the access to justice, especially for the marginalized and the vulnerable sections, the women, the SCs, the STs, the OBCs, because those are the people, and that is what we talk about, the concept of equality or social justice, which forms the basis of the constitutional morality, right? Next is encouraging ethical leadership. We need to understand that if we have got ethical leaders, they can demonstrate their ability towards integrity. They can demonstrate that their commitments toward the public service. Next is that these sort of legal framework and structure, they need to adapt towards the evolving challenges. We all know that we are undergoing through a recent transformation with different technologies. Globalization is taking place. So all these frameworks need to sort of acclimatize or adapt to these sort of changes, making sure that the constitutional values are not disturbed. So what we see is that it is our responsibility to maintain the principles of the constitutional morality so that we can realize the objective or the idea of the welfare state of India. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a question, and that is 2019 mains, and it came in the ethics paper. So just see what is meant by the term constitutional morality. How does one uphold the constitutional morality? So please write an answer, and if you can, post in the comment section. So the next article is with respect to the elderly care. Now, India is witnessing an aging in the population, right? Now, this demands a proactive policy approach by the government, especially with respect to the elderly care. Now, this is with respect to the social sector, welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections. Now, see what I just said, that India is witnessing an exponential growth in the number and proportion of the elderly people. Now, this is primarily because of two reasons. The first is the reduction in the fertility rates. Fertility rates across different states in India, it has been reducing. The second is the rising longevity. That is the rising life expectancy of people. Now, both these factors together cumulatively have contributed into rise in the number and proportion of the elderly people. Now, see, according to the data from the United Nations Population Fund Agency, it says that in the year 2011, the elderly population constituted around 10% of the total population, but now it is supposed to touch 19.5% in the year 2050, right? Also, what we have is another data which says that 30 years from now, that is in the year 2050, we'll have around 300 million elderly people, right? And this was around 104 million in the year 2011. Now, if you compare the strength of the elderly population in India to some of the populations of different countries, what we see is that the elderly population in India, 134 million, is fast reaching the current size of the population of Mexico or Russia. Right. Also, the 2050 population of the elderly will be close to the population of the US today. Then India's 12 million population of 80 plus is equal to the total population of the countries such as Belgium, Greece or Cuba. Right. Also, in the graph, you can see that the decadal growth of the elderly population has been consistently rising, and it is being projected to be around 40.5 for the period 2021 and 31. And for the overall population of India, you can see it's just 8.4, right? Now, coming to the challenges faced by these elderly people, right? What are the challenges which are being faced by them? The first and the foremost is the social challenges. See, that is social neglect. Many of these elderlies, they have been facing the neglect by the younger population. And the reasons are attributed to the Western education or the nuclear families, right? So these are some of the reasons which are attributed to the low condition and neglect of these elderly people. Next is the abuse of elderly population. There have been instances where these elderly people have been abused emotionally, physically, sexual abuse has taken place. And that is the reason that there is there's a dire need for urgent action. Next is feminization of aging. Please understand that there has been a trend of feminization of aging. And what we see is that the social bias against the women in India, it has sort of led to a situation where these elderly women, they are having sort of less resources, or they're prone to more sexual exploitation, right? Or other physical abuse. Then we have got the economic and financial challenges. See, please understand that we have majority of the elderly population in India, they lack income and they have poor financial status, primarily because that they have no access to the pension system, pensions. And whatever pension they are getting, that is a very sort of small amount, insufficient amount. Next is low funding by the government. the government of India spends only 1% of its total GDP in the pensions. Now that is a very small amount and it won't cater to the needs of the elderly population. Next is lack of housing and other basic amenities. These elderly people, they are not being provided with proper adequate houses, right? And those houses which are being provided, they're inappropriate or they're unsuitable to their needs. Next is health issues and challenges. See, please understand that according to the longitudinal aging survey of India of 2021, it says that almost 25% of the elderly population in India, they face mental health issues, and almost 75% they have chronic diseases, right? Different diseases, chronic diseases. Now, next is the increased need for geriatric care. See, this is a word. Geriatric care means the elderly care. Now, why there is a greater sort of need for geriatric care is because that there has been an increasing trend in the non-communicable diseases. As I said, increasing trend in the chronic diseases. Also, these elderly people, they suffer from the sort of hearing issues. They suffer from the sort of eye related issues. There are cataract issues. So the cost of treatment is bound to increase. Therefore, there needs to be a sort of adequate funding also. Now, what have been the government initiatives for elderly care in India? The first and foremost is the National Policy on Older Persons 2011. Now, this policy primarily has three components. First is that it encourages people to make provisions with respect to their old age. Second is that it encourages the NGOs to make sure that they contribute in the care of the elderly. Third is that it makes sure that we have got adequate facilities for the healthcare of these elderly people, right? So these are the three components of the national policy for older persons. Next is the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme. Now this provides sort of old age pensions to the people over 60 years of age belonging to the BPL category. Right. So remember this. Next is we have got the Rashtriya Vayushri Yojana. Now this is a scheme which aims to provide the physical aids or the assisted living devices to these people, right? So that they can help to carry out their day-to-day routine tasks easily. Next is the Pradhan Mantri Vaya Vandana Yojana. Now this is a scheme which provides social protection and it also makes sure that the person in the old age is protected from the uncertainties in the future market conditions, right? Next, we have got the Senior Care Aging Growth Engine Initiative and Sage Portal. See, it tries to incentivize those startups for investing or for designing those products which are in line with the needs of these elderly people, right? Now, what should be the way forward? See, the first is formalization of caregiving economy. According to a report by Niti Aayog, it says that if care is given at home by these caregivers, it can sort of lead to a situation where it can minimize the hospital visits by 65% and hospital charges by 20%. So it emphasizes on the need to formalize this caregiving sector, right? Next is that there is a need for a comprehensive policy on home-based care. That is, we need to make a policy which incorporates sort of the provisions with respect to the vocational training of these caregivers or the career progression of these caregivers, right? So this policy needs to include that. Next is awareness with respect to the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007. It is a sad story that almost 12% people only they are aware about this act. Now this act deals with sort of providing adequate provisions to these older people, right? So a greater awareness is needed with respect to this act. Next is strengthening the pension system. We need to make sure that adequate portions of the budget, they are sort of diverted towards these pension systems so that these pension systems can be strengthened, and what we can see is that adequate amount can be given to these elderly people. Next is the replication of Switzerland Time Bank Initiative. So we have a system in Switzerland. What it does is that you have the younger people who save time by sort of caring the elderly people, right? Older people. And what happens is that when they become old, they can utilize this time which they initially gave to sort of care for the care of the older people. So what it does is that it actually is sort of working like a bank, right? So that sort of mechanism can also be started in India. So what we see is that, definitely there is a need to make sure that these elderly people are protected, they are having adequate resources with them, and they are not treated as a liability, right? They are treated as an asset, and we need to have proper sort of regulations, regulatory mechanisms, proper facilities, proper framework, so that we can provide adequate services to these elderly people. So the next topic is with respect to the direct seeding of rice. What we see is that the Punjab government has been promoting this technique primarily because of its benefit, like it uses less water and labor. So we'll see what this technique is all about. Now this is with respect to GS3 agriculture. Now see, in traditional sort of planting of rice, what happens is that we first plant this seedling, and then once after 20-25 days it grows into a small plant, we transplant it, we sort of replant it to other flooded fields, right? But in direct seeding of rice method, what happens is that we don't have this transplantation. There is no requirement of nursery preparation or transplantation, so seeds are directly sown, and there is then no requirement of flooded fields also. Now what are the benefits with respect to this direct seeding of rice, DSR, what we call it? See, the first is, according to a data by the International Rice Research Institute, it says that this technique of DSR, it requires around 15 to 20% lesser water compared to the traditional sort of practice of planting rice. Next is, it also has labor savings. See, please understand, what happens in traditional practices that you require a lot of labor when it comes to raising the seedlings, or when it comes to transplanting them again, right? But in this direct DSR method, what we see is that there is no requirement as such. So it reduces the labor requirement, and also we have got, it matures 7 to 10 days faster. So it has a faster cultivation, because that, see, you are actually sowing it earlier, right? And you don't have that requirement of sort of replanting it again. So you have got the faster cultivation also. Next is that it has reduced weed infestation. Please understand that there is no requirement of sort of flooded fields. So if you don't have requirement of flooded fields, it reduces the growth of weeds also. But there are issues and challenges. See, Indian Council of Agriculture Research has highlighted that yes, you have got reduced weed infestations, but there are cases of sort of weed, because you are not having a sort of a flooded field, and there can be sort of the growth of weeds, and over there you would require the herbicides, right? So you can see in this field. Next is seed requirement. DSR method has a higher seed required rate, right? Because of the germination variation. So in comparison to the transplanting method, it has a sort of an added cost, as it requires a higher seed rate. Next is land leveling. See, you can see in this image that you have got the laser land leveler, right? Now this is an added cost for the farmer. So thus it becomes a sort of more cost intensive system for the farmer. So we need to provide them adequate subsidies also. Then is, we have got the seed availability. Good quality seeds are required for the DSR methods, right? Because see, in traditional farming method, we have got, first we are transplanting them, first we are actually raising the seedling, and then we are transplanting them. But over here we need to directly get the crop from the seed, right? So we need good quality of seeds also. Now, what should be the way forward? See, what we see is that out of the 79 lakh hectares of the sort of paddy cultivation in Punjab, we only have around 1.73 lakh hectares of land which is being actually used through the direct seeding of rice. So what we see is that there needs to be adequate incentives. So there needs to be a comprehensive education for the farmers, so that we can tell them that yes, see, definitely there might be initial added costs, but ultimately the sort of productivity in the DSR method is more, and it requires lesser labor, it requires lesser water. Next is, we need to have adequate training and ready helpline, so that there can be, the farmers can be given information with respect to the best practices, with respect to the techniques which are to be followed. Also, we need to have a sort of a mechanism where adequate funding, for example in the labeling system we see in this image, adequate funding can be given to the farmers so that they can utilize this technique of direct seeding of rice. Now, before we go to the next topic, we have a very important question. This is also a technique of rice cultivation. We have got the system of rice intensification. So this was asked in the year 2022. So the question says, the system of rice intensification of cultivation in which alternate wetting and drying of rice fields is practiced results in reduced seed requirement, reduced methane production, reduce electricity consumption. So just tell me the answer and post in the comment section. So the next topic is with respect to the initiative of Digi Yatra. Now, it has been in the proposals that this can be extended to the hotels, the rail travels, or to different public places. So, we'll see what this Digi Yatra initiative is all about. Now, this is with respect to the GS3 science and technology part. Now, see, this Digi Yatra initiative, it is actually based on the BEST, that is biometric enabled seamless travel, right? And the basis of the technology of this system, of this initiative, is the facial recognition technology, right? So what happens in facial recognition technology is that, see, let's say you have got a person and you have got the image clicked of this person, right? Now, once you have the facial features, now it matches with the database, right? And if the database gives a clearance, then you can have the person and who can be allowed to actually travel, right? So that is how the facial recognition technology works. Now, as I said, that it enables a paperless movement, and the objective of this Digi Yatra initiative is to make sure that there is seamless travel. There is less time for the security clearances, and therefore we can improve the overall travel experience. Now, this is being undertaken by the Digi Yatra Foundation, and this Digi Yatra, it's a consortium, and where you have got the 5 private airport players having a stake of 74%. And you have got the Airport Authority of India having the rest 26%. So please remember that it is a not-for-profit company, this Digi Yatra Foundation. Now, as I said, that the Digi Yatra Foundation says that the ID does not carry any personal identifiable information, so that there have been concerns. There have been concerns with respect to the privacy, right? With respect to the consent. Some of them have alleged that the data is sort of prone to misutilization, right? Or adequate consent mechanisms are not there, right? So what the foundation has said, that once you have this app in your mobile, it only actually gives you a number like an Aadhaar, right? And it does not saves your information, and the information is only saved in the mobile app, right? So what it says is that there is only a sort of, it does not carry a personal identifiable information, and the Digi Yatra central ecosystem only saves a hash value or a numerical value with respect to that person. Now, it is primarily deployed at the entry gates outside the airports, as well as the security screening queues. And also what we see is that there has been a greater acceptance of these sort of Digi Yatra clearance system at the baggage drops, right? At the other security clearances also. Right. Now, as I said, that there have been issues with respect to the privacy. What the Digi Yatra Foundation has said that the biometric data or any other personally identifiable information, it is not stored in any database permanently. So what they say is that the data, which is once a person travels, within 24 hours, that data is purged. Right. So that is what the explanation of Digi Yatra is. Definitely, this is a very good initiative when it comes to the sort of minimizing the travel time and making the travel experience better. But what we need to focus upon is that there needs to be proper privacy norms in place, proper consent norms in place. Now, coming to the prelim snippet sections, we have got the first topic as the Summit on Peace. So recently we saw the Summit on Peace taking place. Now, this was primarily an agenda of the West, and it did not actually include the Russian sort of interests or the Russian voices. So the 2-day Summit on Peace in Bergenstock, it took place in Switzerland. Now, it actually brought together more than 90 countries, right? And it made a strong call for an end to the ongoing war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. You can see the wordings of these conference, they are sort of more in favor of the West, right? And that is the reason that India has not signed the final document. So just remember this, that there was a sort of a Summit on Peace, and it was held in Switzerland, right? The next is the 46th meeting of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting. So what we saw was that the Ministry of the Earth Sciences, its body, that is the National Center for the Polar and Oceanic Research, we have got this. It hosted the 46th annual meeting of the Antarctic Treaty on Consultative Meeting, right? So it is an annual meeting where of the original 12 parties to the Antarctic Treaty. So see, this Antarctic Treaty, it was signed in the year 1959, primarily to safeguard and to make sure that the Antarctic belongs to the global commons, and it is not exploited unsustainably, right? And any private party or private country does not sort of extend its jurisdiction over it, right? So the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959 and established the Antarctica as a region dedicated to peaceful purposes, scientific cooperation, and environment protection. So just remember that. Now, India has been a consultative party to the Antarctic Treaty since 1983, and that is the reason that India has time and again participated in the events. And we had this 46th meeting of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting, which was held in Kochi in India. Now, this is consistent with India's ability to foster positive international discourse on scientific cooperation, environment responsibility, and Antarctica cooperation. Now, when it comes to the third topic, we have got the Red Sea. So the Red Sea is in news primarily because of the disruptions to the international trade. Now, see, we have got the Red Sea. Now, these are the adjoining countries. Just have a look. We have got the Saudi Arabia. We have got Egypt. We have got Sudan. We have got the Eritrea, we have got Djibouti, we have got Somalia, right? We have got Yemen. So these are the adjoining countries. Now, there are a few places which are important for the exam. So we have got, for example, the Strait of Bab el Mandeb. Now, this is between the Yemen and this is between the Eritrea and Djibouti over here, right? So please remember. Then we have got two important gulfs. We have got the Gulf of Aqaba, right? Just remember this. And over here we have got the Gulf of Suez. And then here you have got the Suez Canal and a very important port known as Port Said, right? Next is that, just remember that we have got this portion of Somaliland. Now, this is a sort of a part of Somalia itself, and there are other places as well. You can see that we have got the different places like Daklak Archipelago, and we have got the islands at Farasan Islands. So just have a good sort of overview of this Red Sea. So the next topic is with respect to the Teesta River. So we have got floods in Sikkim, and that is the reason that we have got Teesta River in news. Now, Teesta River is a major right bank tributary of the Brahmaputra River, and it originates in the Himalayas near the Solamao Lake in the Sikkim and flows in the south to the West Bengal. So you can see here you have got Sikkim. So the river actually flows for some time in West Bengal. It originates in Sikkim and then it enters the Bangladesh. Now, source, you can see the source of the river are as Pahurni Glacier, Khangse Glacier, Solamao Lake, and are also considered as the source of Teesta River. Now, please understand that the major portion of the river basin lies in India and only 17% of it is in Bangladesh. Another important point is that the river Brahmaputra is known as Jamuna in Bangladesh. So just remember that. The river joins Brahmaputra in Bangladesh before it flows into the Bay of Bengal after meeting with Ganges and the Meghna. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.